hopefully today we'll figure out, what our prompting sequences and what those are, and why it would be important to know it, because you as a parent are going to want to make a decision, or as an educator, as a professional, as to what's the best way to go about supporting a child to be successful in whatever you're trying to, help them do. So we'll be able to hopefully name 4 general types of prompts. There's lots of different prompts within prompts. Explain what errorless teaching is. Okay, and that's all about prompting and reinforcement and fading those prompts, but making sure we can support our kiddos. Describe prompt dependency and how to avoid it. And Erin, you mentioned that word, prompt dependency. Really easy, and I see that a lot, not just within families, but even in classrooms or programs where our kids become dependent on prompts, right? And we might not even recognize what we're doing is supporting that. And then, of course, explain the connection between prompting and reinforcement. We're going to have a little bit on that. So let's start with just what is a prompt. I'm not sure prompting is always clearly understood, even though we all prompt all the time. We just may or may not be aware that we're doing it. Okay, so really, it's an important tool for helping to assure your child's success, right? Sometimes it's about trying to teach them something new, but really it's about helping them learn to do something independently, or as independently as possible, right? So prompts really is any kind of assistance that we provide either immediately before, which we'll clarify a little bit, during and or after an instruction that we've given or a question we've asked that we're looking for a response. Okay, so prompts can come in at different times, but it's important to be conscious of and plan for our prompting, as to be conscious of it. So prompts come in many different forms, and they can be used to achieve just about any skill or task you're looking to achieve, right? It can support somebody who doesn't have that yet. It can be very subtle, right? So a prompt can be as quick as just looking at something that you want your child to attend to or to respond to, right? Or it can be as intrusive as really physically moving a body part, helping them lift up a leg to teach them to march in place, right? Or to take their hand and physically manipulate it, or help a child stand up. And you say stand up, and they don't know what you're talking about, where you can physically support them standing, right? So that would be, more intrusive prompts, and obviously just, glancing at the right answer for something. Or, when you give a child instruction, say, give me the pencil, and you look at it, that would be pretty quick, subtle type of a prompt. Okay. And you're looking at your eyes, otherwise it wouldn't be helpful. So I think one thing that I always like to cover is what a prompt is not. So it's not doing the task for your child. It's not doing it for them. If you want to teach your child to eat independently, it's not you feeding them, it's helping them learn to feed themselves, right? So the intervention really has to help your child, be able to participate or do that response that you're looking for themselves. Ultimately, we're looking for independence, or as close as we can get to independently doing something as we think our child is, able to get to, or at least participating in it, so they don't feel like it's always somebody else that is doing it, that they can participate to the extent they can. Yeah. So, how do we support success? It's kind of the title of this presentation is, supporting your child to be successful. So prompts can be used to help someone with self-help skills, such as dressing, play skills, like whether, using an iPad, or as simple as stacking blocks, drawing, etc. Physical tasks like cutting with scissors or a knife, initiating an interaction. So there's some of those task kinds of things, but also could be for developing social skills, right? For teaching, a child how to go up and say hello to somebody, or respond to a greeting, right? Or to ask a question to initiate or respond. So different kinds of prompts can help with that. So some of the skills could be using a spoon, independently, taking turns, learning labels of objects, washing hands. So I'm going to note that some of these tasks are, and we're not going to get into it in depth today, Or what we'd call a discrete task, right? So a discrete task would be labeling an object, where I hold up an object and say, what is this? Tiger, right? So it's discrete, it's one thing expected. I think some of the more challenging ones to learn to prompt are what we call, routines, right? Or multiple steps, like washing hands, right? Or even using a spoon. There's many steps involved. You have to reach for the spoon, grasp the spoon, bring your spoon to the mouth and get the food off, and then put the spoon down, right? So there's multiple steps. And that would be true for things like hand washing, dressing. That's what we call sequential tasks. Tying shoes, there's multiple steps involved. Again, today I hadn't planned to go in depth in those. I mean, there's some, but the principles of prompting apply, whether it's a discrete or whether it's a sequential task. Okay, so here's some of the tasks that we could teach kiddos using prompting. And our goal, of course, ultimately is independence. So using prompts to help, get at that desired response. We're prompting them in hopes that down the road, if we prompt right and well, that they will get to the point of independently doing that task themselves, or as close as they can. So prompting them correctly, in other words, to, support them so that they feel successful and that it's at their level, and then fading that could lead to increased independence and also reduce errors and practicing mistakes. So one of the problems when we don't prompt kids enough, they'll just keep practicing the same mistake over and over. So if, for example, I held this up and said, what is this? Right? And they said, dog. And said, no, what is this? Boy, no, what is, and if I keep saying, and they keep getting to practice mistakes, then they're not going to get the benefit of learning, right? So when we get into errorless teaching, we'll talk a little bit more about that, how we want to help them be successful, not keep guessing at the right answer, but give them the answer, right? It's not a test. We're trying to help them get the right response, right? So what's the parent role in prompting? It's finding prompts that work. Okay, so the best prompts are the ones that can be faded and then the learner remains successful. Okay, so it's part of your job, and you can certainly have support, staff, whether it's behaviorist or an aide, also work together to figure out, where are they right now? What's their skill? How much help do they need? And then start there and then fade from there. Okay? So the prompt type will depend on, your child's skills and abilities, what they can do. And then what maybe they have limitations around. So we have to take that into consideration. If a child, for example, can't see, then we're not going to use visual prompts, right? If they can't hear, we're not going to use verbal prompts, right? If they can't walk, or move physically, then we have to be careful what we expect them to do. And we have to find what would be the best prompt to support them with the skill that they need. So 4 general types of prompts are physical, gestural, right? Like even glancing at something, that would be counted as a gesture prompt, right? We're using our eyes to point to something. Visual or spatial types of prompts, and that can mean a lot of different things, and verbal prompts. And we'll talk about why you want to be a little bit careful with verbal prompts, and that's because they're harder to fade. Okay? So let's get into, physical prompts, for example. We have our full physical prompt, right? And, an example of that, of course, would be taking the person, your child's hand, or, physically moving them, right? Not forcing it, mind you, right? But if they want to pick up that spoon or they want to eat, then, helping them to pick up that spoon, get the food on it, and bring it to their mouth, right? Or helping them is some of the picture examples here. For example, with writing something, that would be full physical. We use our hand, we use our muscles to guide that child, right? A partial physical prompt would mean you're providing some assistance, but not quite as much. right? So sometimes it could just be in this picture, for example, the individual is now just kind of at the elbow, helping that child move a little bit so that they feel supported, right? So it's partial, so not as intrusive as a full physical. And then we have shadowing, right? So shadowing is where basically you are just hovering your hand over and close to them as they're trying, and sometimes that is just enough support for them to feel the confidence to go ahead and try it on their own, right? And if needed, there's something called graduated guidance, which would be if they're starting to fail, that you can reach in and help them and then back to a shadow. Okay. So those are some types of physical prompts. And then a verbal prompt is really any verbal assistance that's given that helps the learner use target skills, such as spoken words, physical actions, a step in a routine. Okay, so you're using your words to give them more information, right? So for example, you give them a direction, oh, pick up the spoon, right? And that's the direction. The verbal prompt might be, okay, put your hand on the spoon, put your fingers around it, right? That would then be prompting. Or for example, if you said, go wash your hands, that's your direction. That's not a prompt, it's a direction. Go wash your hands. And then if they don't walk towards the sink, then physically you might prompt them to walk towards the sink. And then your verbal instruction might be turn on the water, right? So that's a prompt. That's a verbal. How do you wash your hands? Turn on the water, put your hands under the water, put soap on your hands, rub hands together, right? So those are all forms of verbal prompts, right? The instruction was just go wash your hands, okay? So a full verbal prompt, for example, could also be something like you give the whole word or sentence. For example, if I, again, using my little tiger friend here, say, what is it? Tiger. So my verbal prompt is, giving them the answer or the label for it, right? And then a partial verbal model would be something like, what is it? So I just start the beginning sounds and see if they can say the rest, okay? Or it might be, and this is when I taught my son, he would want to just come up and pull me by the hand when he wanted me. And so I started teaching him to say, Mom, because he signs, he's also not verbal, or I'll get the beginning sound out, Mom, come, right? And pretty soon he'd come over to try and take my hand, and I would just go, I'd do a gesture, right? Mom, and then I just might do the sound, come, right? So that would be a partial verbal if I just went, and then if he went, ma, because he'll go, ma, right? But that's the best he can do. We've tried to shape it better, but at least it's him saying to me, Mom, come, and I understand it, right? So the partial would fade from mom to ma, right? And then he knows, okay, I'm supposed to say Mom, come, and then fade it from there. And my fade with Zen just to start the sign, and then he would remember, oh yeah, I'm supposed to say Mom, come. Okay. So a direct verbal, I gave you an example of, like turn on the water, that's a direct verbal. And a fill-in can be something like you're teaching them a song and you say itsy bitsy spider, and they go itsy bitsy spider, and then it's itsy bitsy, and they fill in the rest. For my son, I would go Mom, and then he'd fill in come, right? So that was another part of how we, faded from Mom, come to Mom, to Mom, to right? So that is what we did, started with a fill-in and then faded out to partial verbal and then gesture, okay? So here's the problem with verbal prompts. They can be difficult to fade if it's something like, if you say turn on the water, right? So for most people that learn, most learners, there's really no problem with verbal prompts, okay? But for some of our learners with disabilities, they can be hard to fade out. So if you're always using a verbal prompt, and I'll give you an example of that, kids can start paying attention to the prompt and not the cue in the environment that tells them what to do. All right. So when I say go wash your hands, if they walk into the bathroom, they see the sink and they see the faucet handle, you know, they would turn that on. If they wait for us to say, turn on the faucet, how do you fade that off? Fade that out? That's a little bit hard, right? That's why sometimes physical prompts is actually an easier prompt to fade. So if I, you know, again, if I could say turn on water as I physically prompt them, or I could just say wash your hands and then physically take their hand, put it onto the faucet, help them turn, and eventually you could see how I could fade that to maybe just to the hand, to the elbow, then just touch the faucet until they get that, right? Verbal prompting can be more difficult to fade unless it's like a single word or, you know, the example I gave of a couple of words and you gradually back those off. And again, it can be difficult to say only parts of word for some things. And we tend to overuse verbal prompts because we aren't always aware that we are actually prompting and making somebody prompt dependent. Okay, so sometimes our kids will just learn to wait, okay, because we haven't been able to fade it. So they'll just wait for the prompt. Right? So here's an example. So bell rings and little Billy does not line up for lunch. Okay, so most of the kids have learned, oh, when that bell rings, it's time to stop playing and go line up. All right. So somebody always says to him, Billy, go line up. So now he's not responding to the bell. He's responding to somebody saying, go line up. Right. So, you know, that's the lowest effort level on our part to just say, go line up. Right. But Billy never lines up without the verbal prompt. He thinks that he waits for us to say, go line up, instead of that the bell is telling you to go line up, right? So the problem is the learner does not gain that independence, right? And we just kind of automatically do it because we expect him not to. Or maybe if we'd given him a second, he would have looked around, seen what the other kids do. You know, but in a situation like that, we might teach him to pay attention to, oh, what's everybody doing, right? And then teach him to look around and say, oh, they're lining up, right? Or when the bell rings, we might physically start to move him and then gradually fade that, okay? So it's just kind of an example of how sometimes we get stuck in just verbally prompting a lot, okay? So it could be the same thing like when we say dinner time and we want everybody to go wash their hands, right? And then we have to say, go wash your hands every time, right? So we're reminding them, this is the step you need to do before you come sit down. Wouldn't it be nice if you just said dinner and they knew to go wash their hands, right? In most situations. So other kinds of prompts, models and gestural prompts. So modeling is basically, we're just demonstrating the exact response the child is to perform. You know, whether it's just clap your hands, right? Or, you know, teaching them to put, you know, the addition to sink. I would say, you know, do this and then give them the chance to do it, right? So we're modeling. And then gesturing, again, we're pointing or motioning to the desired response. So again, it could just be a head nod. And this is where we sometimes don't realize that we're prompting, right? So if we just kind of like look at the thing and say, pick up your shoes, and we're really trying to teach them the label of shoes, and then we look at the shoes, then they're just waiting for us to look to see what it is they're supposed to do, right? So we have to be careful with that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. That's how sometimes prompt dependency happens because we don't realize we're prompting. So a gesture can be a head nod, your eye gaze, as I mentioned, pointing, holding your hand next to something as a gesture. And I think this is where I'm going to see if I can show you a clip. Let's see if it just opens from here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Can you see this? Do you see a video on your screen? No? Okay. So that means I need to start a new share and try it again. So you're going to see a couple of different types of prompts in here. You're going to see, you know, a gesture prompt. I think it's mostly, and it could be considered a model if she's modeling what it is that's supposed to happen. So let's take a look.
Touch my ears.
So that's a full physical.
Are. Where's my ears? You got it. Oh, good. Touch my nose.
Full physical.
Touch my ears.
Gesture.
Touch my ears. There they are.
Move to full physical.
Good. Where's my ears? Good. So
that's a prompt fade, right? So she had to do full physical, and then she just tried, you know, gesturing or touching, and then she just did what we call a partial, where she brought her hands up a little bit, not all the way. Okay, and I think that's
another thing you may have noticed is that the instructor was not allowing mistakes, and she would.
So that's going to be about errorless learning, where he did get one mistake in, and then she realized she needed to catch him as he started to make the mistake and redirect him to the correct response. So he can't fail, right? Okay, so let me go back. Okay. So gesturing, modeling, visual prompts. I think we're all pretty familiar with visual prompts. We use them all the time, right? So visual prompt is, you know, anything that you would get information through seeing that would help you to do, you know, complete an action or a task or respond correctly. So a visual prompt's a picture or similar cue that the learner sees, which provides information about the correct answer. So it can be a picture schedule, a first then card, a script, so written text. So for some of our readers, I had a little guy I worked with who was a really good reader, really young. And he really, and still to this day at 17, it really helps him if he sees something written out. Language is a little bit difficult for him, but if he sees it and can read it, so we would hold up the response. We'd maybe say, what's your address? And hold up the, you know, the written response, 223 Main Street, right? And we could hold that up, and that was a visual type. It was what we call a textual cue, which is visual, right? It could be video. So when we video model something, yeah, Aaron, you have to unmute.
Can you? Yeah. So Sue is sleeping. So the step with the Sue is now available. I sent her the link.
Okay.
Can she join right now?
Yeah, she can join. I should be able to let her in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No problem. I'm happy that you can join us. Okay, so anything, you know, even a drawing, sometimes a quick little drawing can be helpful to give somebody the information you're looking for. Okay. So as I said, I think we all use prompts, including, you know, and we go into a bathroom and they have a sign saying, wash your hands, right?
Mm. Okay. And I have a question actually, yeah. Denise.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of have a routine for Sue, but I'm training staff, the new staff. Mm-hmm. I want to make some, how to say, measuring prompt. Mm-hmm. Like I recognize what the physical prompt, verbal prompt, and visual prompt. But for example, like getting a dress. So I show the step, how I'm doing, mm-hmm. but I didn't measure it, like how much I help her, right. Like a verbal prompt. Can I have a chart, like then we can see how much we give her a prompt.
Okay, so yes, and that's really important, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, it sounds like you are modeling for staff. Mm-hmm. actually.
Yes.
So what it would be good for, here's one way to do it, Erin, is to model for them what you're doing and then have them do it and then write what prompt is being used, or as you go through it, write down, well, I needed a full physical prompt for this. And we want to fade that to a partial physical, or we're using a partial physical. And next we want to fade to a gesture prompt, right? Or something like that. So yeah. So we can talk about it. There are forms out there. There's also data forms that I'll be showing you. I should be able to show, you know, so that we can track the prompting and then you can decide, okay, what's next? They are at full physical prompt, they're successful, there's no resistance.
Right.
And partial physical prompt.
Yeah, that's exactly I want, because I gave them modeling what I'm doing. Then I didn't track them. Then kind of lost. Whenever the new step comes, I have to do it again, but everybody has a different phase.
Right.
So then who is confused and I don't see a progress.
Yeah, of course. And that's the problem, you know, with prompting. And I will get to that in a slide about the importance of communication with the team. So everybody's on the same page and where they're prompting. Yeah. So we can do that. And I don't think I posted yet the prompting data form. I finally just found it, but I will. But I have it on the slide. Yeah.
Phoebe, are you there?
Yeah, we have somebody joined us, which is great.
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome. Glad you could join us. So we're talking about different kinds of prompts, and we're now talking about a positional prompt, right? So a positional prompt means, again, where something is positioned that gives the person the information as to what it is they need to do or what it is, how they need to respond. So it could be something as simple as, you know, you're holding this up and say, you know, give me the cup, and the cup is moved closer, right? So give me the cup, and the closest one is the one you're most likely to take, right? So that would just be one example. And then, you know, fading it, you just want to get them closer and closer until, you know, they're able to correctly choose the right one, and fading it back, right? Or you can line up, as we're looking for independence, you might start with, you know, just lining up the clothing, for example, in the order, and it is, you know, gesture to the first one and then the next one, or full physical prompt to start with, and eventually fade to lining up, and then eventually, you know, have them fill in what comes next and maybe get it out of the drawer or whatever, right? But this is just an example of what a positional prompt might be, particularly, you know, for somebody who's not quite independently figuring out what they need to put on or when, you know, like putting on the pants and then trying to put on the underwear. No, this is the order that you would want to put it in. Okay. So sometimes, I mean, I see parents do this just, you know, with typically developing kids that are younger, that they want to learn to dress independently. So they might together lay out the clothes the night before, and then they know which order to pick them up in. Okay. So that's positional prompt. And there we go. So prompt hierarchies, you know, they should be arranged into hierarchies of intrusiveness. What would be the highest level prompt, all the way down to the lowest or no prompt. So our goal, of course, is to decrease the intrusiveness of the prompt, or how big the prompt is, while they still remain successful. You know, we don't want to jump from, you know, just a verbal when they're not able to respond yet at a partial physical, right? So we want to know what the hierarchy is. And I think, Erin, that's kind of what you're asking too, is like, well, what's the biggest prompt and how do we track where they are and when it's time to move to the next one? So you want to start a level again where they'll be successful. So typically full physical obviously is the most intrusive type of prompt. And again, keeping in mind, and this is for a new person's benefit, that it isn't doing it for the person, it's supporting them to do it themselves, or, you know, be able to participate in the doing. I guess I'll put it that way. So again, prompt hierarchies, one of the purpose in, you know, understanding them and laying them out is to help design a fading plan and structured teaching to maximize the consistency in there. And I know that's one of the things you just mentioned is, you know, the consistency is going to be important. So as a learner is successful with a more intrusive prompt over several opportunities, then the next less intrusive prompt should be used, and then the next, and so forth, until you're able to prompt all the prompts if, if that's a possibility. Some of our guys, I mean, like my son, he's so distractible that even though there's a skill he might have, he partly finishes it before he's off to something else, right? So sometimes we still sometimes have to bring him back to get focused on the task. So, but it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a skill deficit, except to complete it. So if learner is not successful, then of course he or she should move back up to a more intrusive prompt. So if we try to fade and they're not successful with the fade, then we might have to back up a little bit or even all the way and then try it again, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about reinforcement. Our last academy was on reinforcement and what reinforcement is and all that. We'll mention it here because part of teaching a child to do something and in responding to the success, even with prompting, is to provide reinforcement. But what level of reinforcement are we providing if it's prompted versus independent, right? So prompt dependency, speaking of which, is relying on the prompt to get the job done, right? So what we're striving for, again, is independence, and always having to have that prompt to complete something is not going to help them get there. So children who receive prompts can sometimes become dependent, right, in order to even respond. When children become prompt dependent, they respond to the presence of the prompt as opposed to the instruction or natural cue, all right, that ought to direct the response. So going back to the example of Billy, the cue in the environment we want him to respond to is the bell rings, and that tells him it's time to line up. But instead, he waited for somebody to tell him to go line up, right? So, the natural cue for washing your hands is you're standing at the sink, there's no water on, you turn on the faucet, right? And that cue is the sink's faucet. So it's a visual cue, really, if we think about it. Oh, the faucet, and I've learned to turn that on, and I turn it on, and then the water starts running, which actually is the reinforcer for turning it on. Now I got what I was looking for. Oh, I see the water now. That's my prompt to stick my hands under the water. Oh, now my hands are wet. That's now both a reinforcer for putting my hands under the water because I got what I was looking for, right? As well as the cue or prompt to go to the next step, which is put soap on, right? If that makes sense. Okay. So that's what we want our kids to respond to, not us, taking their hand and turning on the faucet and then taking their hand and putting it under the water. We want to fade that out so they can get all those steps. As I mentioned earlier, that's a sequential task. And, that's when we do what we call a task analysis and then figure out how to, teach that task either from the very beginning step or starting with the last step to fade it out. Okay. Again, not enough time in just kind of this brief overview of what prompting is, but being aware that, a sequential task requires a certain level of planning, including doing a task analysis. And Erin, I think in some ways, if you're looking at, the task of Sue dressing, that is a good task analysis to do. What are each of those steps that are required to, for example, put the shirt on, right? And then each one of those steps, how are we going to teach that? And what level prompting is needed for each step, right? And sometimes there might be some steps that are independent, right? So if you get to help her with putting it over her head, but then she pulls it down, right? That step is independent. And then you might need to prompt the next step. So a task analysis is looking at each step, figuring out if they're already doing it independently, or do you need to prompt in at one level? And then again, fading those prompts. I would have loved to included the whole chaining part. I believe in those modules I showed you with the link to the ADEPT modules, they're relatively short and they do get into chaining, what we call forward chaining, starting with the first step of a task like hand washing, and backward chaining where you start teaching to be independent at that last step, right? So it's a whole nother kind of section on prompting, and it includes reinforcement. Okay? So again, we want to fade prompts as quickly as possible to get to independence. So again, how do we get to prompt dependency? We've talked about this a bit. Your child may learn to respond only with prompts if they aren't given the opportunity for independent responding. So they kind of become used to being prompted, right? And sometimes kids just like that prompt, right? Oh, if I don't do it, you're going to come over and talk to me, or you're going to come over and help me, right? And I kind of like the attention I get. So we have to pay attention that we're not, reinforcing their child not doing something, not because they can't, but because they enjoy, the attention around it, or, some socialization opportunity, right? So we want to be careful with that too and pay attention. And your child may learn that they might as well wait for help if, if it's always coming. But the best way to avoid prompt dependency is to really, again, kind of plan out how you're going to prompt and when you're going to prompt. And then you also have to think about, how am I going to reinforce them for getting more and more independent, right? So if, you hand over hand help a child pick something up and put it on a shelf, for example, and it's full physical, you certainly want to praise that. Great, we picked that up, right? But you don't want to make it quite as good as if you were, as you can fade the prompt, you want to make the reinforcer even better for being more independent. So even moving to a partial physical, or even if they touch it when you point to it, and then that's a start, you want to reinforce it. Yes, you're picking that up, right? And maybe it's a more enthusiastic praise, or you have to decide, are there other reinforcers we want to provide, right? So you have to, when we get to reinforcement, we'll talk more about that. So I'm going to try and go through this relatively quickly. Yeah, we have a little over an hour. We should be good. So there's two types of prompting sequences. So, I think this is one of the first things I put into what do we hope to learn today? what do we hope to achieve by the end? Is to understand what prompting sequences are. So we have what we call most to least prompting sequence. And that is really most effective if your child, I still have students here, lacks necessary skills to complete a task. Okay, so they don't have that skill yet. So we want to assure their success. We can't expect them to do something they don't know how to do. Like, we can't hand in their shoes and say, put them on if they've never done that or showed any ability to do that, right? We want to prompt them at the highest level and fade from there. So prompting sequence provides the most invasive form of prompting first, and then fades to lower level prompts as they master the skill, right? So that's most to least. And then we have least to most, right? So least to most prompting is just like it sounds. We start with the least prompt we think they need. Doesn't mean the lowest level prompt on the list of prompt. It just means what's the lowest level they might need. So for some of our kids, if you say, bring me your shoes, and they stand there and you just point to them, maybe that's all they need, right? Until we can fade to just say, bring me your shoes, and, they bring them, right? So it really depends on what's their current skill level and so forth. But most to least is what we use with errorless learning, which we'll talk about. And least to most is when they probably already have the skill or the prerequisites they need for that. And so we don't need to prompt at the highest level. And then we can move up instead of move down. Move up as needed. But we want to be careful not to start too low and then just have to keep increasing every step of the way. So here's an example of a hierarchy, most to least: immediate physical guidance at the hand, and then immediate partial physical guidance at the hand. And by immediate, I mean, as soon as you say, pick up shoe, that you're right there helping them pick it up, okay? And I'm going to try and show an example of this. Immediate partial physical guidance at the hand, immediate, and then down to immediate partial physical guidance at the forearm. This is just an example for one person what that most to least might look. It's also fading. Shadow with the upper arm. So you're just kind of shadowing their upper arm now, and now they're independent. Okay, so let's see if I might actually have to stop the share to get to this one. Sorry. This was not queued up where I needed it to be. So let me get back down. You probably can't see my screen, so I'm talking to myself, I guess, pretty much. And talked about, okay. All right, let's see if we can't, I will show this to you if I can get it to show. Okay.
Ready?
All right. Back to here. Sorry, back to my Zoom. Back to screen sharing, and let's see if it'll show up for us now. Well, we might not be able to show this one. I'll give it one more shot. Not quite sure why it doesn't want to show up. We'll try it one more time. It's great when it works, and it's really disappointing when it doesn't. Okay, so this one isn't going to do it for us. Let me see if I have another one. I have several queued up. They're just not showing up on my screen share. Let's see if this one will. I think it's always helpful to see examples, right? Okay, let's see if this one will work for you. And share. Boom. Now, can you see a tape on the screen? All right. Let's see. Hopefully this is a different one, not the one I just showed you. Nope, it is the same one. Okay. Can you see a new one? Yeah?
Open marker.
All right.
Nice job. Open marker. Good job. Ready? Open marker.
Move to a gesture.
Nice job. Open marker. Open marker. Nice job. Open marker. Nice job.
Okay, so cancel. So as you could see, hopefully that showed the full sequence. Manipulating my screen here. So that was just an example of starting from most and then going to least, right? And you notice the second to last sequence was giving the instruction a second time, right? So she was giving him the opportunity to respond, didn't respond, give him one more to see if he understood that. And if he hadn't, she would have swooped in and provided, probably just go back to the last prompt that was successful, which was pointing. Okay, so that's right. I showed that. So errorless teaching, basically it's an instructional strategy that ensures children always respond correctly. How is that? Because we're providing a prompt immediately upon giving the instruction, right? Or with only a very slight hesitation. So as each skill is taught, children provided with the prompt, right? And or cue immediately following the instruction. In this way, it's just assuring success, and then you can fade from there. And again, we mentioned if we are teaching a new skill, you can't really expect them to know it yet. So we have to, get in there and quickly show them. Again, it's not a test, right? Although there might be times you're just not sure, and then you can ask them to do something, and if they don't do it, then you can ask them again and then prompt it, right? To make sure that they are connecting the instruction you're giving with the task that you're prompting them to do. So the immediate prompt prevents any chance for incorrect responses. And then the prompts are again systematically removed or faded until they can respond correctly on their own. So why we do errorless teaching? So the theory behind errorless teaching, and this came up with mostly in teaching children with autism, some of what we learned, is that particularly kiddos with autism do not necessarily learn as successfully from their mistakes, right? So, a lot of times more typically developing kids, you're like, is that how you do that? And they'll thought and think about it and look at you and then maybe do it correctly or say, well, I thought that's how I did it, right? They can reflect on that, or they can self-correct a little bit more readily than some children with autism. So having them keep repeating the same mistake over and over is just really frustrating, right? So that kind of trial and error, let's keep trying it. They learn to start guessing, or they get frustrated, and next thing you've got tantrums and aggression, right? And I've seen this too many times when it's always unintentional. Nobody's trying to provoke a tantrum, but they think somebody knows how to do something. And so, no, I know you know how to do it. Come on. Which one is red? Nope, that's not red. Pick red. Nope, that's not red. You know this one. Come on. Which one is right? And next thing you know, they're falling on the ground, because if they knew it, they do it. Right? And it just gets frustrating for our kiddos, for anybody. So how about positive reinforcement? When are we bringing that in? So positive reinforcement really is providing something after a behavior that we're looking for that increases the likelihood of the behavior occurring again in the future. That's our definition of reinforcement, with the caveat that I said that we want them to do. Anytime a behavior keeps happening over and over again, whether it's a desired or undesired behavior for us. So if a child is laying on the ground crying, and they get something desirable from that, they might lay on the ground and cry again in order to get that something they like, right? So it's a reinforcer, even if we didn't mean for it to be, okay? So when we're trying to teach a child a new skill, we want to reinforce the response we're looking for, right? And so it might start with prompting that response and then reinforcing them, providing something desirable, whether it's a smile, a tickle, a cracker, right? Or just the fun they're having doing it because they were successful, right? So if you're teaching a child to blow bubbles and you take their hand and you put it in and you hold it up and then to you and you blow, but their job was to hold it up and they get the bubbles, that's a reinforcer. Wow, I got what I wanted. That was exciting and fun. And now I'm going to try it again, right? So errorless teaching uses positive reinforcement combined with prompt strategies to teach new skills. Right? So instructions are immediately followed by a prompted correct response, okay, and then followed immediately by reinforcement. So the closer the reinforcement is to what we're trying to help them do, the better the connection will be that, oh, when I put the block in the bucket and then I get applause or a tickle that I like, I connect, oh, that putting that block in the bucket gets me this response that I'm looking for, right? Or that I enjoy, right? So it needs to be immediate. That's one of the rules of reinforcement. It's called immediacy, right? Within a second or two. And then, but again, you're not going to give the best reinforcer for the highest level prompt, but it has to be enough that they want to keep going, okay? So if you're able to go to a little bit less and it's of a prompt, then it's even bigger praise or a longer tickle or whatever it is that you use to help reinforce what you're looking for, the response. So again, reminder, a reinforcer is chosen based on what the likes or interest of the child or anybody is at the time the instructions being given, not on what was desired at another time, like yesterday or this morning, and now we're working on the skill in the afternoon. And they were thirsty and we gave them orange juice in the morning and that was reinforcing, but maybe they're not now, right? Or maybe we like M&Ms, so we try M&Ms, but maybe they don't like them that much. So a reinforcer has to be something that's desirable for the person. And we have to do ongoing checking to make sure that's something that they're interested in at that particular time. So you know, it just can't be convenient because what do we have in the cupboard? Oh, we have that. Let's try that. You have to make sure it's something they want, by either giving them a chance to have a little bit of it if it's a food, or you start reaching like you're going to tickle them and they start smiling and, you know, take your hand and want to be tickled. So whatever it is, we want to make sure that it's desirable for them. Otherwise, it's not going to reinforce anything. So here's an example of errorless teaching. The child is given an instruction to put a puzzle piece in a puzzle, put in. If it is the first time for this skill, again, the child is immediately physically prompted by taking their hand and helping them put the piece in correctly, right? So put in, and you take their hand right away and help pick it up and put it in. It's like, yeah, good job, you put in the puzzle, right? Until they start catching on and fade. So your reinforcement hierarchy. So again, prompted responses generally receive somewhat less reinforcement than independent responses. But you be the judge of your child. If they need a lot just to do that one little prompted response, give them what they need and then fade it from there, the reinforcement, right? Because we want them to then try and fade to a less prompt and they get the bigger reinforcer for that. So the lower level the prompt, the higher level the reinforcer. So when learning a new response, better reinforcement can be given initially for a prompted response, okay? But again, if you can't move from that level prompt, then you have to pay attention. Are they just getting way too much something good for that, right? And then change it from there. So keep in mind, again, even with errorless teaching, errors can still occur, obviously, because we're trying to fade and maybe today they're not feeling well and now our just at the elbow isn't enough. We might have to shift back. So if a child makes an error, so what you can do, and depending on your situation and your child, you can either withhold reinforcement and then start over. Like if you say, pick up shoe, and they pick up a sock, or if they just look at you and don't respond, you can say again, pick up shoe, right? Or you can just, withhold the reinforcement and present the same instruction again, giving an immediate full physical prompt. So you can just try it again in the instruction, just not, give them anything, or give them the instruction, fully prompt them to be successful and give them the reinforce and then try and fade. So error should never be followed by negative comments, okay, or reinforcement. Like if they make an error and pick up the sock, you don't go ahead and tickle them and say, oh, that was so silly, right? Because, oh, well, picking up the socks got me something good. Maybe that's what they were asking for, right? And then I've actually seen kids get intentionally give incorrect responses because it's such a fun reaction that they get to it, right? So there were some computer types of learning programs for kids. And if you clicked on the right answer, like if they said touch the red ball and you had a choice of red or green, and if they touched the green ball, it made this funny, silly sound like, no, that's not it. And the kids liked that so much that they figured out if they did the wrong one, they got this reinforcing consequence because they liked it. So they intentionally, and I've seen that even when they're working with somebody together, it's like, oh, I know you're going to get, make a really sad, funny face when I get it wrong. So I kind of like that. So I'll get it wrong. So again, pay attention to what you're reinforcing. Okay? So you also don't want to make negative comments like, that's not right. You know better than that. Or, whatever negative comment you would make in response. You just kind of let it go, represent, prompt for success, and reinforce. So there's again, error correction procedures. And again, that's kind of a bigger workshop. This is, here's what prompts are. Here's the basics of prompts. Here's what causes prompt dependency. Here's how to fade them. And I would have loved to bring in error correction. And if, that could maybe be a part 2 workshop, we'll see what we get through here. I just kind of basically gave you an error correction. If it's wrong, you can just give a pause, represent again, reinforce if they get it correct. Okay. And then the other part is then try something else for a second. Like if you said, like the video we saw, if the lady said, point your nose, and they made a mistake, and you said, point your nose, and help them point to your nose. Say, good, that's right, nose, but it's not a great big yay. And then you go to touch your ears, and they already know that, and they do that. And then you go back to point to your nose again, right? And if they get it correct, then they get the bigger reinforcer for the unprompted or independent response. I realize that's a lot just to take in verbally. So I can post the correction procedure if we can't get to it in more depth. So independence and fading, I think I probably said this ad nauseum. To become independent, you need to make sure you're decreasing your level of prompting so we can get to independently correct responding. So errorless teaching strategies are used to decrease prompting. So that's part of the goal. Most to least, right? We gradually fade out that prompting and encourage independence. And we can also include time delay, and we'll talk about what a time delay prompting is. And then of course use what we've talked about, most to least prompting for new skills and to make it errorless. So least to most prompting requires a minimum of 3 prompt levels. So they're either independent, intermediate, or you're using what's called the controlling prompt. In other words, you're prompting, okay? So in least to most prompting, the least intrusive prompt that you believe your child will be successful with is tried first, right? So this is a child who you're pretty sure probably has this skill, or they're pretty close to it, or they've already are down to maybe a gesture prompt. So you're not going to do a full physical prompt if they've been successful at less than that. So try the least first. If they're not successful, then go up to the next highest level that you think they can be successful. So again, if you've given instruction, touch nose, there's no response or an incorrect response, move to a more intrusive prompt. So the other thing you do with least to most prompting is you can provide a short 3-second time interval to give your child an opportunity to respond before prompting, because this is not something brand new that you're teaching them, right? So they should make that they just might need a second to think about it and respond, right? So, give me shoe and 1, 2, 3, prompt, right? But you don't want to go longer because they might kind of lose what it is they were supposed to do, especially for our younger kids or somebody who's really distracted. So you want to make sure they connect your prompt, like picking up the shoe, with the instruction that you gave, right? So least to most prompting, here's an example of a least to most prompting hierarchy. So the activity is using a spoon to eat, time interval. So this is the other part of your planning, is like, what's the time interval? Can we wait 1 second, 2 seconds, or maybe a maximum of 3 seconds to see if they'll respond if they don't respond immediately? And now, Erin, this is where, again, whether it's a home staff, whether it's a school staff supporting learning and moving towards independence, everybody has to know what that looks like now. And that's what you would be putting in your data. What was the interval, right? And then the next person looks at, oh, they're doing a 2-second interval, so that they're not giving 3 or expecting in 1, right? So reinforcer, you identify what's the reinforcer going to be. Here's what we're going to say. So your prompt hierarchy might look something like this. You try it, pick up spoon. And if they don't do it, then you might gesture to the spoon, right? If they still don't do it, you might do an indirect verbal. Where's the spoon? That'd be indirect verbal, right? Direct verbal would back to, how would we be a direct verbal? Your direct verbal might be a repeating of that instruction. Pick up the spoon there, right? Put the spoon in your hand. So put the spoon in your hand would be more direct than where's the spoon? That's indirect. A model would be then you picking it up and putting it down and giving them a chance to do it. A partial physical assistance, they're still not responding. So notice that these are getting more and more intrusive. So the next one might be taking their hand and helping them to reach towards it and see if they'll pick it up then, or the highest level would be, again, full physical assistance. I would not probably go through this whole sequence, right? And how long would that take? And how far is it away from your initial, pick up the spoon? It could be pretty far away by the time you get here, right? So you'd probably try a couple of these, and if they weren't there, then give the instruction again and then try the next level prompt, right? Make sense? So I forgot they actually gave the examples. So I have to move this, you guys. You can't see, but I can. Okay, so place food on spoon in front of the child. So this is how you might teach it. And wait 3 seconds to see if the child responds independently. And you put the spoon on, or the food on the spoon, put it in front of them and said, pick up spoon. And if the child does not respond in 3 seconds, direct the child to the spoon by pointing or gesturing to the spoon. Indirect verbal might be if the child does not respond, ask the child, what do you do with the spoon? Or how do you eat your cereal? Right? So that's indirect. For some kids, that's very effective, but not for everybody. Direct verbal, if the child does not respond again, use your spoon to eat. That's more direct. We're telling them, pick up that spoon, right, in a different way. And again, we've talked about modeling, where you model, scoop the food, put it in your mouth, or at least if it's just pick up spoon, show them partial physical. Again, you might guide the child's hand to the spoon, but you do not use full physical assistance to pick it up. And then full physical would obviously be you helping, take their hand, pick it and pick it up. So full physical. Okay, so that would be an example of a prompt hierarchy for that task. So prompt fading, we pretty much talked about the process of systematically eliminating or reducing the prompt until your child responds again to the natural cues. So another example here, you've been prompting your 3-year-old to return a high five to his 4-year-old brother, right? So his brother comes up to him and says, high five, Evan. And he just stands there. So you started maybe behind him again. Prompting from behind is usually the best way to do a physical prompt. Side by side's okay, but behind's the best. So you're ready. You say, Johnny, go up and ask Evan to do a high five. And he goes up and you're prepared to pick up as soon as Johnny says, give me a high five, Evan. You're prepared to take Evan's hand and help give the high five and then get some praise. And his brother's probably going to say, yeah, high five, right? You're working together on this, right? So you've been prompting and you want to fade that until the natural cue would be what? What's the natural cue for Evan to give a high five to his brother? What would the natural cue be? What are we looking for? Janice, yeah. Unmute, or you did adjust.
So like the brother putting the hands up or saying high five or the motion of.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's what we're looking for, that, when his brother goes up to him and says, high five, Evan, that he's responding. Now that's kind of 2 cues, right? And you nailed that. It's like high five. You could just say high five, but his hand's always up anyway. So what's he cueing off, saying high five or just the hand? We don't know, but if he does it without mom getting involved and prompting that, that's what we're looking for. And if we want to test it, we could just say high five and see if he starts lifting his hand. Well, if we want that, but who goes up to somebody and says high five without raising their hand, right? So that's all pretty natural sequence, right? So yeah, so that's what we want for our kids. When they, when somebody says hi, that they say hi back, right? When somebody says, what's your name? That they tell them their name without being prompted to say Johnny, right? Or to hold up a card that says Johnny. We need to fade that out. Okay. And again, you can see where a verbal prompt can be harder with that, but sometimes that's our only option for a particular skill. So fading prompts. Again, to fade it, you still have to provide enough information. You remember, prompting is adding information to the environment to help ensure success, right? So you have to have it be enough so that, once consistent success is shown, the intrusiveness or intensity can be reduced so you can get to independence. So you get there by progressively using less intrusive prompts, by increasing the delay between instruction and prompt, and that's your time delay, which I believe I have slides ahead here on. By decreasing the intensity of a prompt, quieter voice, less pressure on the hand to pick something up, for example, or decreasing the amount of the prompt. Okay. So here's an example of a type of a prompt fade, right? And many of you are probably familiar with this from your school days or having children that you help with their homework. And this is one way that, they teach them to write letters by having the full example and then gradually fading it until they can do it on their own, right? So that's a very visual example of a prompt fade. So your time delay is a prompt fading strategy that systematically increases the amount of time between the instruction and the prompt, right? So the delay gives children brief window of opportunity to give a correct response on their own. And so we want to pay attention to that. So for example, 2-second delay. Parent tells child clap hands, parent waits 2 seconds and then manipulates the child hand to make a clapping motion. And then they get praised for clapping hands. And then might increase it to 3-second delay. Okay, so they're successful. They needed a prompt at 2 seconds and you're able to fade that prompt. And now can you wait to 3 seconds, right? So we want to gradually increase the time that they can respond without needing a prompt. Sorry, I should have gone 3 to 2. So, and then same thing, we've pretty much talked about, you can go from full physical to lighter and lighter touch, right? Until all you say is clap hands and they're clapping hands. So fading to gesture, a gesture could be, in this case, just like the woman did when she pointed to ears from just not right there, not like modeling touching them, but just, for example, clap hands and just starting to raise their hands up. That would be a gestural type of prompt, actually, right? Until they go, oh, I'm supposed to, clap my hands. And then pretty soon you could just maybe twitch your finger to nothing. But if you're reinforcing the clapping, right, you don't start reinforcing before they've completed what it is they're trying to do, then they're like, well, why am I not getting it reinforced? Or, oh, that's right, I have to do this first, right? Or whatever it is. Okay. So this is where we get to data, where ideally, when we've got children that need some real systematic instruction and support and prompts, and we want to understand this is the one way to communicate if there's a team involved, to collect data on here's the task, maybe clapping hands, and were they independent? Did they just need a verbal? Did they need a gestural? So this is just an example of, how you would track where they were. And then to decide, wow, they've been 100% at a partial physical, let's move to a gestural, right? Because the task we're teaching them, you could do a gesture for, right? Like picking something up. And then you want to, take a look at that and see, and so that you can plan for that next level reduction in prompt. So some fine points of prompting. So when appropriate, use physical prompts as they are the easiest and quickest to fade for most learners, right? Prompt while standing behind your child. And of course, this means most to least prompting if it's appropriate. Prompt while standing behind your child, because the child is less likely to associate the prompter with the task, right? So, it's almost like you are kind of, just an extension of them, reaching out and helping manipulate them what they need to do. It's easier to fade because now they're not as readily like, oh, here comes mom. She's gonna pick up my hands and help me with this. Goal is always to have learner respond to natural cues. And you want to, again, plan how are we going to fade those prompts? Well, part of it's teamwork. It's being aware of the level of prompt needed, and then helping them be successful until you can fade that prompt. And again, you want to be careful not to just deliver full prompts. Again, unintentionally, I've even seen that, well, to be honest, with new staff with my son, where they keep, they don't realize he no longer needs that level of prompting, right? Whether it's a full physical prompt or, he can pull up his own pants, for example. You don't have to pull them up for him. This is not today, but there was a time it's like, it's a matter of instructing, recognizing what you're doing as prompting, recognizing what the goal is to be independent, and helping to figure out how do we get them to independence? Well, by, gradually fading out those prompts and making sure to reinforce success at the most independent level. So we've already talked about verbal prompting, making it difficult. And we've also talked about, sometimes you don't even realize you're prompting, right? So we'll sometimes prompt our child without realizing it. And I think we gave some examples, but another example would be, besides eye gaze, and I've watched what I used to do, there was a time I did in-home early intervention programs, and I would, go in there and observe and support and teach. And I still remember watching this little girl, and I decided to stand across from her to see where she was looking, because she wasn't looking at the task that was presented, right? So if someone was trying to teach her colors and saying, give me the purple, right? And then the girl would look at the lady's face instead of the task or the tutor's face to see where she was looking. And she didn't realize she was looking at the correct answer. Another thing I've seen is what we call siding, where say you're trying to teach your child to learn to, pick up her shoes, and you've got them and know the difference between shoes and socks, but you always put the shoes on this exact same side. So pretty soon they learn whatever on the left side is the correct response, right? So that could be unintentionally prompting them with, what do we call that kind of prompt that we talked about? If you put something always in the same position, it's a positional prompt, right? So I learned to respond based on the position, not by the label that I'm trying to learn, so I can be independent and going to get my shoes. And even sometimes your facial correction. So as a child I've watched this, I've seen kids start to reach for the response, what they've been asked. And then the tutor or the parent starts either smiling, yeah, you're reaching for the right, so they keep looking to make sure they're right, reaching to the right thing. Or they start kind of doing this or shaking their head no, and they're not even aware of it. So the child then switches, right? So they're not actually looking at the thing, but they're looking for the prompt that we are what we call inadvertently giving them, right? So it's just an awareness thing. We all do it. And again, we mentioned it's really important to communicate with your child's team if there's a team involved, to make sure everybody's on the same page as to, are we prompting all at the level that we've identified as needed right now. And if in your work with them, you discover, wow, I was able to fade, make sure that's communicated so somebody else doesn't go in and start at the higher level when they don't need that level of prompt. And make sure that the reinforcement is pretty consistent as well. And then prompting strategies will continuously change. So having everyone who works with the child on the same page with those changes will lead more quickly to independence, right? And those of us who have worked with staff for our children or have seen it, or work in, Janice, a preschool setting, or worked with kids that are in a setting where there's multiple people involved in trying to help them and teach them even just basic things like washing our hands or coming to sit down, to circle time or whatever. We a lot of times see, prompts happening inadvertently, right? Or just not realizing, oh, I'm not helping them to become independent, because I always go and take their hand and lead them to circle time, even though, there's always this little chime that goes, says circle time, right? Or whatever it is. So it's just becoming aware. So some of the conclusions on this are, you need to identify a prompt that will allow your child to be successful in the skill you're trying to teach. And again, it's not always teach to help them with to become independent is another way I'd put it. And we can't assume a child who's learning just needs more time. Like, well, if we just give them more time. No, they're at a level that, I think they can learn this skill. We need to give them the opportunity by using prompts to support them in getting there. And we've talked about the level of prompt they need and having a plan for prompting and prompt fading.